podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. It's something a bit different this week, and I'm delighted to say that we've got a legend of the game in coaching stakes here. It's Rick Macci, who is a former coach to, and I won't list them all, Rick, because we don't have that kind of time, but Venus Williams, Serena Williams, Andy Roddick, Maria Sharapova, Jennifer Capriati. I could go on. Rick, thanks so much for joining me.
No, I'm glad to be here. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I hope so. You're 68 years young, I think I'm right in saying, and you just said you just jumped off court. You're still working every day, I think. When I'm your age, I fully intend to be either on the golf course or the sofa. What keeps you going every day and still doing what you do?
Nah, I love it. I feel the exact same way as when I started at 22. I still have the passion. I love to help others. I just love being on the tennis court. It's kind of been my life, and it's like I still teach 50 hours a week, 7 days a week, run a business. We have 50, 60, 70 tournaments at the facility. There's a lot that goes on. And as long as you have the passion, you're not really working. And that's the way I look at it. And, I have a gift and a niche. And whether it's a 5-year-old or someone on the pro tour or the number one player in the country, I teach anybody, anytime, anywhere. And I love it just as much now as I did back then.
It's amazing to hear. I mean, do you think you're the kind of guy you'll be working till, the day after you die, or might you eventually retire?
No, first off, no, I'm never going to retire. I want to keep doing this as long as I can. I think when you unplug, that's the beginning of the end. There'll be a time when, you maybe can't do it or you don't want to do it, but I don't think it will be, I don't feel that way, and I don't even think of retiring. I'm just getting started. There's a lot of projects, even more so since the movie. But more importantly, I just love being on a tennis court helping. And I don't change strokes. I change people's lives, and it's more of a life coach than a tennis coach. So to answer your question, I'm going to do this as long as I can. As long as I have the passion, I'm going to be on court number 1 at 6 o'clock in the morning.
I guess working in a sport like tennis, which is always moving and always changing, it probably keeps you going as well, because presumably you've had to evolve with the sport. You couldn't stand still.
Yeah, first off, great question. 15 years ago, my partner, Dr. Brian Gordon, who has his PhD in biomechanics, we were on the cutting edge with stroke mechanics. And if you see a lot of the things I've done on YouTube, way ahead of the curve with the modern forehand, and really change the way people teach the game, So I've always been on the cutting edge. I told someone the other day, Roddick, who I had in the early 90s, he kind of was the first of the Mohicans. He kind of kept the racket on the hitting side, the pull and the flip, and I'm going, what is this little kid doing? So sometimes the players can teach the coaches. So you always got to get better. As I tell everybody, if you're not getting better, you're getting worse. And I think if there's any coaches that are out there, you always want to get better. You can't read a book and do this stuff. There's an art to this besides the science. But yeah, no, the game's always evolving. And if you're not getting ahead, you're getting behind.
And when someone comes in to see you and they've got something different like that, they're doing something differently, what's the balance between saying, well, no, this is how it should be done, or saying, well, this is working for you, so let's stick with it and kind of mold a game that suits you and what you're doing?
First off, great question. There's not a wrong way or a right way. There's a better way. Okay, well, it still could be my way, but there's going to be a better way. You got to take the temperature of the person. Like I just had a player this past weekend from Notre Dame, changed the forehand, I changed the backhand, I changed the serve, I changed the footwork. I mean, there was reconstructive surgery on steroids. I did, and this guy's 19 years old. You know what I mean? With younger kids, it's easier because they're like a piece of clay, and you can kind of mold the technical part because there's no bad habits. There's no bad muscle memory. I don't have to reprogram the reflexes. So it's different. And it depends on what they are looking for. The technical part, as you know, it gets trickier as they get older. You know what I'm saying? Because they have that muscle memory. So it really depends on what they're looking for. But listen, I can help them so much even more mentally or strategically. I mean, those are the easier parts because everything in life is in the eye of the beholder. But the technical things, you'd be amazed how even though people are on the pro tour, it's just because they've done millions of something and they've kind of optimized that, there still could be a better way. And so if they want to change, I'm all in and I can expedite that learning curve.
Let me take you sort of further back, if I may. I heard the other day that you didn't pick up a tennis racket till you were 12 years old. That in the kind of modern world where kids are, Andy Murray's kids are probably already hitting tennis balls at the age of whatever they are. That seems like a very unusual step. How did that happen, and what gripped you, and how did tennis become your passion?
Yeah, when I was a little guy, my parents played golf. We belonged to the country club in a small town, Greenville, Ohio, about 30 miles southwest of Dayton, Ohio. I was a very good golfer, and then my father passed away when I was 10 years old. We lived a half mile from a park. Listen to this. It's a crazy story. And so I went down there, picked up a racket, started hitting against the wall. I really liked it because it came back all the time and there was no argument. I just fell in love with the game, hearing the ball hit the wall back and forth. Now, that was 12 years old. This was like the late 60s. And I just fell in love with the game. Expedite that thing by 18 years old, no lessons, self-taught. I was number one in the Ohio Valley, one of the better players in the state of Ohio. Played the satellites for a little bit. Very athletic. I'm in the Hall of Fame for basketball and tennis. So that's kind of how I got into it. And what's even crazier, I've never had a lesson in my life. And I teach probably more lessons than anybody in the world. So it's not where you start, it's where you finish. I fell in love with the game, but I always had a gift to analyze and figure it out on my own. And that's been a cornerstone of my teaching, so I always have that in my back pocket. But I understand kids and I understand parents, and there's an art to this whole thing. That's how it started. I knew I wasn't going to be good enough to be on the pro tour, even though I played some qualifying pro tournaments. 22, I got into teaching. And like I said, I love to analyze. I love to help others more than myself. Had a gift to communicate. And here we are all these years later. And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, it certainly is. I wonder, is there a first moment you remember when you kind of first realized that you had this knack for communicating with people, or maybe a first player you did something with and went, oh, that worked?
Yeah, not really. I never look at myself that way. Even when the movie, I know we're going farther down the road, I had to ask my daughters, am I really that hyped up all the time? And they go, Dad, yes, you are, So I don't ever look at it like that. I just always trying to get better. And this has always been how I have been, Midwest values, brought up, by my mom. And I think that's a big part. When your students can feel the genuineness and all these other attributes, that's how you really extract greatness. And that's been a big key. Obviously, I've had some very talented young players. You can't mail it in. I've had 5 players become number one. I kind of called they'd be one or win a Grand Slam. Like Sofia Kenin, scariest little creature I ever had at 7. I said she'd win a Grand Slam, or Sharapova, or Jennifer, or VW, or Serena. So Roddick I didn't, because the men's game's a little more physical, even though he was number one in the country at 12. So I never really looked about I had a gift. I just knew that people liked what they were getting, and more people kept coming, and they're still coming here in 2023.
You mentioned the movie a couple of times. We talked about it on the podcast when it came out, King Richard, which lots of people will have seen, and Will Smith obviously won all those awards. How disturbing was it to see the mirror held up to your face? And you mentioned having to ask your daughters if you're really like that. I wonder if you didn't enjoy it that much.
No, first off, it was actually spot on. The first time I saw the viewing here in Boca, I didn't grasp the whole thing. My first concern was how they're going to tell the story. And how the story was told, I was more than happy because it showed, number one, how much I cared. And number two, I took a huge risk, a huge gamble. It's one thing for me to say, I believe in you. It's another thing to say, I believe in you, and you put up a lot of money, hundreds of thousands or millions. Listen, I could have been wrong, got hurt. What I saw, other people didn't see. And I went all in, okay, because I believed in these two little girls and what I saw. But how Bernthal portrayed me, it showed how much I cared. His mustache was a lot bushier. Mine was more like yours, a little piece of ass. Took me 25 years to grow. But no, the movie was great because it showed those things. It didn't go from Compton to center court. Those 4 years with Rick Macy and me taking Venus to her debut, a lot happened there. Listen, when I'm there 4 or 5 hours a day with these girls, hitting partners, ballet, boxing, taekwondo, filet mignon, every day, Richard became my best friend, and BW and Serena were like my own daughters. I tell people all the time, they saw the movie, I should be in the Hall of Fame just putting up with that guy for 4 years, but no, he was my best friend. And it was all about girls. It wasn't about me or the father. And I've been around Capriati, Pierce, Sharapova, Richard. I've had some interesting fathers, and I'm kind of bulletproof at that. So to answer your question, I love the movie. It was spot on. It was almost exactly what happened. Walk, the talk, the nuances. Obviously, you mentioned Will. He was Richard. I'm just telling you, I was there. I had a front row seat, better than any critic, other than maybe Orsine, his wife. It was crazy. It blew me away, the attention to detail. And not a lot of people would know that except VW, Serena, Mom, and myself, because we were there. So the attention to detail, people that did the movie, it was a masterpiece.
You mentioned you saw something in those two girls quite early on. What was it? What did you see in them? What convinced you that they were going to be, goats of the sport?
Yeah, well, first off, you can imagine how much I was asked that question over the past, or really 30 years. And I've never really done it since, took a chance like that. People wanted me to do things. But when Richard called me, listen, I never went out and saw a player. They either came to the academy or I saw them at a junior tournament. So I get this call from Richard Williams. I heard of Venus because there was an article in the New York Times about some kid that was undefeated in the 10 and under, whatever that means. I've seen that movie plenty of times. And we talked, and he was the funniest guy ever. That's all I remember. And he said, Rick, if you come out here to Compton, I promise I won't let you get shot, okay? It was a funny guy. And it was May. It was May, and May is one of the slowest months of the year. And for whatever reason, how crazy is this? Whatever reason, I said, I'm going to go check this out. Jennifer was gone by then. She was already top 10 in the world at 14 years old. But I was very busy at the academy. So I just decided, I booked a flight, went to LA. Listen to this story. I got to tell it. So they come to the hotel room, just like yesterday. And Dad sits down, Orsine sits down, Venus on one leg, Serena on the other, hugging, kissing, just like you saw in the movie. Okay, Richard pulls out a piece of paper, thought I was in a deposition. This guy started grilling me because I think I respected it eventually. If he was going to let somebody in their circle, he wanted someone who's been there, done that, a role model, and a father figure. So I wasn't like taken back, So now he goes, we're going to pick you up tomorrow at 7 o'clock in that bus that you saw in the movie. It was identical. They picked me up. Listen to this. They picked me up at 7 o'clock in the morning. He goes, we're going to East Compton Hills Country Club. So he picks me up. I get on the passenger side. I get harpooned in the buttock. There was a spring sticking up. I get harpooned in the buttock. I look in the back. There's Serena and Venus back there like this. There's McDonald's wrappers, Burger King, old balls, dirty clothes, ball hoppers. I'm sitting there going, what in God's name am I doing in Compton, California? This was 1991. Now, remember, that time I was director of tennis at a 5-star resort, Greenleaf Golf and Tennis Resort. So you talk about going to the other side of the track or the other side of the rainbow, I was way over. So now we start driving to East Compton Hills Country Club. We get 10 minutes into the ride, and I'm looking around, and I go, it's a strange place for a country club. Listen to this. We pull up to a park. There was guys passed. This was 7:30 on a Saturday. Guys passed out in the grass, people smoking, people drinking, guys shooting baskets. We get out of the van. They go, hey, Richard. Hey, King Richard. They called this guy King Richard in 91. ABW. Hey, Meek. Serena's middle name is Serena Jamaica Williams. They go, hey, Meek. So we cross the basketball court. Listen to this. It parts like the Red Sea. They were like celebrities because New York Times was there like 4 months earlier. They knew these little African-American girls that played tennis. We go onto the court. I had a box of Wilson balls shipped there. He goes, Rick, we don't use new balls. I want old balls. I want them digging them out. I went, okay, I got it. So now we go onto the court. You and I wouldn't have played on it. Pass going up, holes in the net. There's a shopping cart around the net post, just like the one you saw in the movie, about 7 chains wrapped around it. Richard, it took him 20 minutes to get the chains off. I'm sitting there going, this is crazy stuff. Remember, I'm at a 5-star resort, filet mignon, and now I'm getting like double hamburger in Compton. So now we start doing drills. Now remember, I had Jennifer Capriati. She won the national 18s as a 12-year-old in 1998. That record still stands today. She's the greatest junior player of all time. So my blueprint for greatness is like no other. Okay, low center of gravity, racket back in the parking lot, the ball was on her strings. Now I'm seeing these 2 little girls, arms going one way, legs going another, beads flying off their head. It was a train wreck. Okay, it was a train wreck. Okay, I saw Venus was very tall. She was like 5'9". Serena was like a little girl still. And I'm sitting there going, what am I doing in Compton? Now listen to this. Then after an hour, because I thought maybe they were top 100 in the nation, I saw some athleticism, and I wasn't like, oh my God, like I have been with others. So now I said, let's play competitive points. It was me and Serena against Venus. The whole landscape changed. Now I'm answering your question finally. The whole landscape changed. I never saw 2 little girls try so hard to get to a ball. Now, there was a rage. There was a burning desire. There was a rage to get to the ball. Even if it was 20 feet out and they couldn't get it, they ran. And their nose was like that far off the ground trying so hard. And I'm sitting there going, this is crazy. I have a lot of kids that try hard, but this was different. Now I started thinking, where could this go? And I right then and there, this is in the movie, I go, Richard, come here. Let me tell you something, because it was more about Venus. She was taller and more mature. Serena was all over the map, okay? She loves it when I say that. Let me tell you something. You got the next female Michael Jordan on your hand. And he puts his arm around me, and he goes, no, brother, man. I got the next 2. So listen to this. Then Venus goes, Daddy, and I go to the bathroom, hugging, kissing, just like you saw in the movie. Venus goes out the gate, walks on her hand for 5 feet, does backward cartwheels for 5 feet. Now remember, this was 1991. If you were big and strong, you weren't nimble. So not only did I think both these 2 little girls be number 1 in the world, I thought they could transcend the sport, because it's not what I saw on the outside. It's what I saw on the inside. I was projecting 5'10", 145, 6'1", 160. I was, that was a coach. I was projecting. A lot of work had to be done. I had to put Humpty Dumpty together. This was a major project, but I just saw something that I never saw in my life. To this day, I haven't seen it again 30 years later.
What's your relationship with Serena and Venus like these days? Are you still in touch?
Absolutely. Yeah. We're like family. We all met up at the after party at the red carpet, laughing, telling stories. Now, remember, from age 10 to 15, we're looking at the world through teenage little kid eyes. Now Serena's a mother. She's going to have another kid that was just announced today. So I start going back down memory lane. We start talking the stories. Venus and Serena were literally crying on the floor, laughing. Remember, this has been a while. All the stories, because you forget. They'd have consulted me with the movie I would have made it even better with these stories, because you can't make this stuff up. So great relationship with both girls. Like I said, we're all family. I go up and visit Richard in West Palm. He's like 30 miles away. He's doing great. He's hanging in there. Listen, we changed history. And I really love the movie because they told it exactly really what happened.
Are you surprised that Venus is still going? I mean, I can't believe she's still out there hitting balls. Every time I think she's done, she comes back.
Not really. Listen, it's hard when you're that competitive to say goodbye. It's hard,
Yeah.
And I think in doubles and in mixed doubles, her and Serena still could win, okay? And I really think they could be competitive. I think in singles, that's rough sledding, because you got to play the next day. Your body's going to feel different. People aren't afraid of them. So that could be difficult. But I don't have any insight. But if they did play doubles, it'd be must-see TV. Maybe they'll play at the U.S. Open. Maybe Venus will retire then. Who knows? But it's must-see TV. Let's face it. If they play doubles, ratings are bigger. More people are going to watch, because especially if they know it's coming to an end. But what's crazy is they're still good enough to win doubles tournaments on the WTA Tour and to win mixed doubles at Grand Slam. So I don't think the door's closed. I think it's still a little open, and it'll be fun to see if they do play.
I was in New York for Serena's, US Open last year, and the show, like the kind of pageantry, which one of my colleagues always says that the Brits do pageantry better than anyone else. I think that night was pretty close. Those 3 nights of Serena's retirement, it's a special party. She gets people going. I have to ask you, especially given your background working with, as you mentioned a couple of times, some of the best young players in the world. We have a great young player in Britain at the moment who's going through a tough time in Emma Raducanu, and we obviously talk a lot about her on the podcast. From the outside looking in, what are the big challenges that she's facing? Because it was kind of obvious at the beginning, she was young, she had a great run and pressure and all of these things, but now it feels a bit different. She's been around a while. Is it just that she hasn't developed and got lucky for 3 weeks in New York?
First off, I'm glad you asked me this question. I actually just did something a week ago on YouTube about her, where I still believe. And the reason why I believe that she can come back and be one of the best players in the world and win Grand Slams. I mean, this is what I see. You remember, Capriati disappeared off the face of the earth, okay? Disappeared. She not only came back, she came all the way back, Jennifer, and won 3 Grand Slams and an Olympic gold and got the big contract from FILA. Now, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. Now, obviously what happened in New York, that wasn't a fluke, okay? You have to have the game. You have to have a lot of other attributes to do something like that. And her mental strength could be her best asset, even though now it's probably kind of lopsided. I'll get to that in a minute. But I love the technical part of her game. There's nothing like a hole there, say like in Coco's forehand. So the technical part is good. She's authoritative. She can play through you. She has the game. You don't lose the talent. You don't lose the game. You lose the confidence. I've never met her. I mean, I would love to work with this young lady. I could help her mentally. I know I could get this girl back on track. Okay. That's a whole nother discussion. But her life has changed, but that doesn't mean she has to change. Everything has changed around her. Okay. But it's still her playing tennis. But I don't know her if she's still that hungry, still that competitive. These are the questions that are going to be asked a lot, because people are always going to assume that's why she's not doing as well, okay? Because she has other interests, blah, 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 blah. I don't know, so I can't answer that question, because it has to be about one thing. Anybody, anytime, anywhere. I love to compete, okay? And by the way, if I compete well, there's candy at the end of that. It can't be the other way around. If it is, you're not going to be as hungry. So I still believe in her. She's very young. She has the game. She has the talent. In my opinion, this thing can flip around. I don't know who's involved with her. I know they've shuffled the deck, how much of it's her, the people around her, but I love that opportunity, but don't count her out. It's not where you start, it's where you finish.
It's interesting you say she's got the game. So we're in the realms of the hypothetical now. Day one tomorrow, Rick Macci gets the job. Would most of your work be kind of thinking about the game and talking about the game? You think her technicals are pretty much there already?
Yeah, I think that she's been taught very well. She understands the geometry of the court. So those things are there. But listen, I'd have to sit down with her or any pro player that was struggling. I got to know what's in their head. I got to know what's going on, before I get into it. Because listen, confidence can't buy over the internet. You can't buy it at the grocery store. It can come and go in the blink of an eye. And there's a fine line. When you're confident, you take it a little early, cut the court, more adventurous, get up to the ball earlier, volley more, serve go. That's what people don't understand in sports. Confidence, it breeds confidence. Unfortunately, it can go the other way. So it happens a little bit more on the female side. Maybe they don't take the punch as much. That's what I saw about Venus and Serena. They were bulletproof. Nothing fazed them. I could see that. Okay. So listen, I'd love that opportunity if it ever came, but I just have to get to know her and what's in her head, because the game is there, but it's a game of inches. But I think in the blink of an eye, this can turn around. It's not as bad. It's not as bad as everybody thinks. Okay. It's not as bad as everybody thinks. Okay. And that's the problem. But if she's listening to everybody else, not all about the competition, then that's a problem.
Yeah. You mentioned a name earlier who has kind of had a similar career path in Sofia Kenin. I don't know how much you worked with her. What years did you kind of end up on court with her?
Yeah, interesting. From age 5, 12, and at 7 years old, there's a lot of videos I did with USPTA. I called her Sonic Boom. The way she took that ball right off the rise, gave you a surprise, tore out your eyes. Okay, she had the best timing of ever. She was the scariest little creature I ever taught. So I usually don't teach people that young. I do now, but at age 5 to 12, I had her. She was one in the nation. I said she'd win a Grand Slam before 20. I was almost right. She was 21. She understood the geometry of the court. She cut the court. She wasn't going to play like Venus or Serena, but she knew what was going on. She had one of the best drop shots ever, and we practiced that 24/7. So, same things kind of happened to her. Okay, but I think she'll get back on track. You don't lose the talent. You don't lose the ability. You lose the confidence. Maybe you lose the fitness. There's an injury along the way, so it can be a little tricky. Both her, and Emma can go back into the top 5. Listen, this thing is so much more wide open. Serena's out the door, already retired. You know what I mean? Osaka's gone, but she could come back to number 1. So there's an opening when you don't have multiple Grand Slam winners in the 16. Now, Iga is, in my opinion, leader in the clubhouse, much better than everybody. She's proved herself. She's the mentally strongest. But this thing's so wide open, most of the players should think, why not me?
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions from our listeners, if you'll indulge me. Quite a lot about US tennis for obvious reasons. This is from Ayush Bengani, who says, they often say that the clay court is the best coach. So why is there so little practice or tournament play even on clay courts in the US?
They say, what do you say? It's best to practice on clay courts?
It's sometimes said, I think, and I've heard Calvin say it on our podcast, that clay court is the best teacher you can have because you have to work out the game so much more. I don't know whether maybe you wouldn't agree with that.
I think it cuts both ways. Okay, here's why. Number one, the points will be longer.
Yeah.
Just because the surface is slower. Ball will bounce higher. You won't get as much value when you hit it hard. So just that alone, got to work the point a little longer. So you might naturally develop a little more patience. That's number one. Number two, on the flip side of that, you might have a tendency to go back more. You might hit off your back foot more. The balls are going to get up higher. Your grip could slide under more to more of a Western. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I think that could be a little bit, it cuts both ways with the clay court. When people say learn how to slide, listen, I've had people win the French Open and they never slid. Capriati, Moschina, Davenport won it. I mean, sliding's overrated, not for the guys. It's a different sport kind of on clay with the guys because you're playing with more spin and outside the alleys. I think for you to play on both surfaces is advantageous. Now, with Venus, we train 2 hours a day on a grass court. How crazy is that? I wanted to shorten up her backswing. See, I was using the court as a teaching tool. It made her shorten her backswing, take the ball early. Good volley would be great. Bad volley would be good. So I kind of was using that as a teaching tool to make her go forward. And it's interesting, right here in my office, I told Angela Buxton from England, the writer, I said, someday this little girl, this was in 1992, is going to win 5 Wimbledons. How crazy is that? BW won 5 Wimbledons. And I said that when she's 12. So what I'm trying to say is you got to play on all surfaces. For someone to say just clay, I can push back the other way because you gotta be careful with that. Okay, I do think it will help maybe the running and the patience and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, you got to be able to play on all surfaces or it becomes mental. The best players are the most complete players, and there's not a better role model right now than Alcaraz. He's changing how you play the game. He's even changing how you teach the game, which I said 3 years ago he was going to do. Now it's okay to drop shot. Before, if you missed a drop shot, it's like, what are you doing that for, you knucklehead? Now it's like, that's okay. That didn't start yesterday. That started when he was 6 years old. Because he'll do it on break point. He'll do it on break point. You know what I mean? So tennis is evolving. I think the chip's going to be used more, the slice, changing the pace. But listen, power's here to stay. Taking the ball early is here to stay. Movement's a premium. Okay. The game is very, very, very different. Even than 6 years ago, athleticism premium, stroke mechanics, in my opinion, at an all-time high. Okay, and you can kind of see that with Coco Gauff on the forehand, where there's a little hole that bubbles up under pressure.
I was going to ask you about that, actually, the Coco Gauff forehand. We often have listeners come and say, well, they say it two ways. One, why are you so convinced she's going to win so many Grand Slams? And B, what's the problem with her forehand? What do you see as the problem with her forehand?
Well, first off, I'm good friends with her father. They live in Delray. Who knows? At the end of the year, if she wants to take time off, she can put this thing together. But you got to reprogram the reflexes. You got to change the muscle memory. I got to reverse engineer a lot. This is not just shorten your backswing or be aggressive. I mean, that's not going to work. There's 12 years baked in extra crispy of a movement. And everybody's tried, but it's kind of been a Band-Aid. It hasn't worked. Now, why did I think she'll win Grand Slams? She's an Olympic sprinter with a racket in her hand. Her backhand is money in the bank. She's a great competitor. She has one of the better first serves on the tour. There's still a little bump in the second serve. She can volley if she has to, and those are enough qualities, okay, to win a Grand Slam. What I'm saying is, if her forehand biomechanically is put together correctly, and she could do this change, which isn't a guarantee, I think she could dominate. That's how much potential this young lady has. But there's a hole there. It's good enough to get there, and it's still good enough to win some slams. But does that mean you optimize or you maximize your potential? See, I do this a lot with players. I'm thinking, what if this player would have had Federer's forehand? What if Roddick, who obviously coach, would have had Djokovic's backhand? We always look at it. That's the way I look at this stuff. And a lot of this starts at a young age. Because at a young age, back to the clay court thing, forehand was probably great. A lot of racket speed. The arm was moving fast, but her stroke is backwards. The arm leads the body, and the body should be pulling the arm. She's always done it backwards. She has a fast arm, so she camouflages it. But now under pressure, as you know, that's when things break down, whether it be somebody's second serve or they have a little bump on a ground stroke. Not so much on the two-hander, because the kids get it for free as a youngster. Because the two hands keep you connected biomechanically, and you're more of a unit. One hand always becomes maybe weapon a little bit, but inconsistent. So hopefully I answered the question of why I think she can win a Grand Slam, because she's so good in other areas. But unfortunately, you're going to hit more ground strokes than anything.
I have one more question, which comes from Calvin Betton, our resident coach, and it's a slightly cheeky one, which is why can't Americans hit a backhand? And obviously with Coco, it's not true, but it feels like through the years, certainly in the men's game, they've all been forehand dominant players, or many of them have. Why aren't you teaching these Americans how to hit backhands, Rick?
Well, I teach ATP backhand where you pull with the right, you push with the left, the racket flips down and back like Djokovic, okay, and a lot of these guys. But I don't think you can throw a net out there about, the backhand. Fritz's backhand, I think, is pretty good. I think Sebastian Korda, in my opinion, he's the leader in the clubhouse. He's the most talented American. He kind of hits the forehand like Federer, but his backhand is like Agassi. I mean, it's automatic. I think he can win multiple Grand Slams. So I got to push back a little bit about the backhand, of why. I mean, if I taught them and they didn't have a good backhand, then I'd own that. But I think I think they get away with a lot of others. But I don't think that you can look at it and just say, why can't they hit backhand? Because I can tell you a handful of guys that have amazing backhands, and I can start right off the top of my head with Korda and Fritz, who's kind of, in the mix right now, especially when Korda gets healthy. Remember I said this, I think he's the best young American, and he'll win multiple Grand Slams.
He's an amazing athlete. I met him in Belgium last year, I should say, and he's an amazing guy for his age. He's so relaxed and talks so well.
What I like is the mental part. He's a cool, calm, collected player. Pedigree's unreal. Both his parents played on the tour. His backhand is rock solid. His forehand is a weapon because he hits a tight spin. So he can kind of hurt Alcaraz. He can hurt Sinner or Rooney. He can hurt you. Everybody probably wants him more spin. I think that's more situational. Plus, he can volley, and he's not afraid to come in, and he can hit it short on purpose. A lot of people hit short, but not on purpose, So he has a little bit more versatility to his game. I think his serve could be a lot better. It's going to get better. Once he's injury-free, his mind gets stronger. Sebastian Korda is going to be one to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I hope so too. He's a great guy. Rick, thank you so much for taking the time. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I could do it all day, and I'm sure we'll catch up again some other time. Welcome back to Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the I newspaper. That was Rick Macci, the legendary Hall of Fame coach, and as he says, Hall of Fame basketball, which was a new one on me as well. Quite the athlete and an interesting guy, so I hope you enjoyed listening to that interview with Rick. I've swapped Rick out and I've brought in our own Hall of Fame coach, Calvin Betton, live from, is it Sicily or Sardinia, Calvin? I get them confused all the time.
Sardinia, Cagliari.
Okay. And it's lovely this time of year, I hear.
It's nice. Yeah, well, today wasn't. Today it rained all day, pretty much. Rained enough to, as Peter Kay would say, that type of rain that gets you wet through.
Right.
But in tennis terms, on clay court tennis terms, it rained all day, but we stopped for about 20 minutes in total.
Okay.
So the courts were very slow. But yeah, it's a nice place. I haven't had a chance to look around it too much yet, but hopefully I will do. And we just had some nice seafood for dinner. So
lovely.
Good.
And we've also got, of course, our resident tennis writer and sometime broadcaster, and appearing from a very dark room today, which is very odd, George Belshaw. He looks like you look like you're auditioning for a play or something.
Yeah, the light it went earlier while I was working.
That's because it's one can't survive while the other is alive. It's because Calvin's just got his light fixed at home.
Yeah,
last had about 5 years. Yours is gone. Right.
It's
good that we don't do video.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to bore you too much with my light bulb endeavors, but I genuinely bought about 20 filament light bulbs, and they just seem to only last like 2 weeks. And it's a really fiddly bloody light to change, and I now can't find the bulbs. So I'll try and sort it for next week, but my motivation isn't quite there to go down through the light bulb looking glass once again, if you like.
You'll notice that this podcast is coming to you 24 hours later than normal. That's not because I fell asleep listening to George talk about light bulbs, but more because he had tickets for Duran. Or is it just two Durans, George? I'm not familiar with their work.
So good, they named them twice. Are you genuinely not familiar with the work?
I mean, I'm aware of Duran Duran as a band, but I couldn't
Birmingham's finest.
I couldn't name a single song, which I appreciate is embarrassing.
I find that astonishing.
Wow.
Yeah. I really just like it's. I don't know why. It's just a huge hole in my sort of blind spot in my music knowledge. I mean, my music knowledge isn't good, but for some reason, I mean, I would listen. Like you would tell me some of their songs, and be like, oh yeah, that's a banger. And now I'm looking at them online. Girls on Film is a great song.
Yeah, it was banger after banger. And the other mildly amusing thing about yesterday was the support act was the Scissor Sisters, or more accurately, half of the Scissor Sisters. So it felt like
one Scissor Sister.
Yeah, so it's Jake Shears. So he was just belting out all the Scissor Sisters bangers. They've also got loads of great songs as well. So wonderful time. And I have to say, their rendition of Ordinary World was haunting. Absolutely lovely. So highly recommend you listen to that song if you don't know it, James. It'll rock your world.
And if you
Duran Duran are actually the archetypal 80s band, in that they released their first album in 1981 and their last relevant album in 1989.
Right.
Ordinary World was 1993.
Last relevant album in 1989.
Ordinary World's their best song, I think.
But I don't like any of the songs, but I could name you them all. I could name you a lot of them. They were massive in the 80s. Absolutely massive.
I sense they may not be your thing, Calvin. Do you want to know another interesting link, and then we can talk about tennis? So sure. Duran Duran's manager sold my parents their house.
Oh.
That's not interesting.
One of our listeners, please comment.
Who know your parents.
Please comment you found that interesting if you're one of our listeners and also a Duran Duran fan, because I bet at least one person would have found that interesting.
So what we've had on this podcast so far is 40 minutes of one of the most famous coaches of the 20th and 21st century talking about his work with two of the greatest tennis players of all time, and George changing light bulbs and having houses bought from vaguely famous people.
You tell me who you want to aspire to be more. I imagine it's not Rick Macy.
Right. Well, as I say, I hope you all enjoyed Rick's appearance, and he was very affable, and I hope we'll have him back on the podcast another time. It was interesting. You guys have had the chance to listen to a good chunk of that interview. I mean, it's always interesting to hear people's versions of events. I mean, I'm not, Rick was there for so many big moments early on in Venus's and Serena's career, and it kind of made me think about King Richard again, and maybe because we felt it was a bit one-sided at the time, we didn't appreciate that actually Will Smith's performance was pretty, Rick says it was like he was there, like it was amazing in that sense, but it made me kind of revisit the film and think about it a bit more, which I thought was quite fun. But anyway, we had some questions from you guys for Rick, and we've also got some questions from you guys for the panel. So that's what we're going to do for the second half of the podcast today. We're going to do Madrid when Madrid is over, because Madrid is currently ongoing. We might mention a couple of things at the end, but I'm going to talk about some questions. Laurie on email has a couple. We're going to start with his second one. Would Calvin be able to elaborate about the 4 stages of the shot: anticipation, perception, decision, and action, how these differ from each other, and also specifically regarding the component, shaping, diversion, and automatic stages of developing these? Calvin, as you said, this might interest a very small percentage of listeners, but if you can give us the kind of Cliff Notes version of those things, then maybe that'll keep people interested.
Okay, yeah, I'll try and do it in as short a form as possible, but also make it somewhat interesting for any people who aren't, like I am, a coaching nerd. So the first one: anticipation, perception, deception, decision, and action. Deception. Wow. Anticipation, perception, decision, and action is like the circular sort of pattern of the shot process. In the anticipation, obviously, is the player they're looking at what they think is going to happen. What can I expect to happen here? So before the opponent has hit the ball, that is, what do I think is going to happen? The next stage is perception. So the opponents hit the ball. and it's what is happening now. What information am I taking within that from what I can see is happening, which goes into the next stage, which is decision. So from the perception, what is happening? What decision am I going to take on what to do here with this shot? And then there's the actual action, which is the actual hitting of the shot. And then from the minute you hit the shot, the whole process starts again. Because from the minute you've hit it, you'll then recover to where you need to recover based on anticipation. This is what's going to happen. So the whole thing starts again. Now, I think what Laurie is probably asking the question for, so I referred to it last week or the week before, whereby a lot of coaching only tends to work on the actual action of hitting the shot. And you don't develop... In coaching theory, it's called a coupling. You don't develop a coupling, a perception-action coupling of you can't. And the theory and research has shown that you can't separate the two things. You have to combine all of those factors into actually training a shot. So whenever you see anybody feeding a ball out of a basket, or a ball machine is the classic example. A ball machine is a waste of time in my view, because you're not getting any anticipation. You know exactly what's going to happen already. And even if you have the ball machine on random, that is not going to train your anticipation, because you're not getting any physical cues from what has happened. Also, it doesn't depend on the shot that you've just hit. If you hit a great shot down the line, you may recover to somewhere else, knowing that your opponent is then going to defend with a slice. You may come into the net. Ball machine doesn't take that into account. It's just going to fire the same ball again. You're not taking any perception into account, because the ball will be exactly the same as what's happened all the other times. Same with a feed. There's no decision to be made, because it doesn't affect an opponent. It doesn't affect what you're trying to do. So you're only actually training the action of the shot. So that's the first one. In terms of the other one, the other stage which Laurie asked about is component shaping, diversion, and automatic. They're just they're the components of how you coach something. In that you have the component stage. So say you're teaching, a forehand drive down the line. First of all, you'd start working on it in terms of just being able to hit the shot, the basic teaching of from scratch to teaching the shot. So, that's the very most basic of teaching it. Then you go into the shaping of it, which would then be to refining it beyond that basic stage of getting it to somewhere like a very good shot. You're then going to go into diversion stage, which means you're going to bring in other things as well as it. So you're not just, obviously, if you're going to hit a topspin forehand approach up the line, you're not just in tennis hitting just 50 of those in a row. It involves some other tennis shots being hit. So the diversion is where you're bringing other things into it as well, whether that be pressure, other shots, mixed in different types of forehand up the line maybe, and that kind of thing. And automatic is the stage where you can produce that shot in any circumstance. So basically in a match situation, in a points and competitive situation. So that's basically what they are. And then in each of those, and you would do one of those stages for each of anticipation, perception, decision, and action. So you would do a component shaping, diversion, and automatic for anticipation. You do one for perception, you do one for decision, and then you do one for action. However, they often merge into one. It's not like you're doing like 24 separate stages, or I don't know what the maths is there. Yeah, so that's that. Probably rabbited on for a bit too much there.
I found that really interesting, actually. So thanks to Laurie. I have a bit of a question about the kind of shaping and how you do that for different players. Like, how much do you go with what feels natural to the player versus kind of pushing back on like kind of natural tendencies to fix the shot? What's kind of the best approach?
I think it tends to be what type of coaching philosophy you have. I mean, I'm pretty open. I like to coach broadly in a constraint-led type approach, which means you're trying to coach within the constraints of the game of tennis. How does this skill fit into the game of tennis? The other side of that is what we call a modeling approach, where you're basing the shot on an aesthetic of what you think the shot should look like. Whereas what I find the problem I have with modeling is it tends to, you lose a lot of dexterity and ability. You can't reproduce the same shot all the time. If you see, and I think like what you want is adaptability in tennis players. You want the ability to, you can't just go, you can say, right, we're going to do someone may come to me and, someone may come to me and go, I want to work on my forehand. And I'm going to go, right, which forehand? They go topspin forehand. Right, which topspin forehand? Cross-court line, off a low bouncing ball or a high bouncing ball? Off a ball where you're 6 foot behind the baseline or off a finishing shot? Right? What situation have you got yourself into there? You're going to follow it with a volley and that kind of thing. So there's 800 different forehands. So to go, we're just going to work on forehands today. That's like a modeling thing. You're just going through a shot. I want it to look like this.
This is all bringing up quite a lot of trauma in my own game, Calvin, because I've got a very extreme one-handed backhand grip. And it's a great shot when the ball is nice in a good position. I can drive through it and catch it perfectly, but it's not adaptable enough. And that's been my biggest weakness. I've got an okay slice backhand that kind of keeps me going at our kind of level. But I know if I had the dedication and could be bothered, I would have to completely change my whole backhand grip and train it for about 3 weeks and do it. But it feels unnatural to me, even though I know it's kind of limitation. So I imagine that many other people are in a kind of similar boat with that, where they've had something drilled into them very early. And
yeah, I mean, basically, in terms of that terminology, basically what most coaches do who don't know how to properly coach, I don't mind saying it, is you're spending too much time in the shaping stage of you're spending too much time in the shaping stage of the action stage of it, and then that's all you're doing. You're just doing the action, and we're just doing shaping. We're not, you can hit the shot, so it's not component, but you're not using any diversion because you're not mixing in other shots, different types of positioning. Now you could do like basically, we're going to do if you wanted to do it like that way, George. If I was going to shape it but I'd move it to diversion, is I'm going to give you those topspin backhands, but one of them's going to be low, one of them's going to be high. But what I will see is, and this is not at the beginning stage. I watched. I'm here in Sardinia at the minute. I watched a top. I think his player has just dropped out with the top 100 player yesterday, with his coach feeding him out of a wooden box of balls, hand feeding him forehands, and he was just twatting forehands, and I think he made about 1 out of 12, and then the coach clapped and stopped the drill. And I thought, well, what was that for then? What we're working on there? I don't mind saying it was Bashar-Vili, so he's probably, I don't know, might have been missing him on purpose, to be honest.
That is his game style, isn't it? Just whack the ball and hope it occasionally goes in. So 1 in 12 is not bad for him.
Yeah,
it might have been the aim.
Needless to say, he lost today to Thanasi Kokkinakis in straight sets. Yeah. Quite surprised to see Thanasi Kokkinakis playing.
Well, there's nothing to play, James, because if they're out of Madrid,
of course, yeah.
This is the problem with it, as we spoke about last week, that if you go out of Madrid in the first couple of days, you've got no tennis for 10 days if you don't play one of the challenges.
Yeah, and he lost to Munar in Madrid, so that makes sense, I suppose. Right, well, thanks for that question, Laurie. We'll come back to your other question a little bit later on. I've got one that I can answer. Love Will Survive on Twitter says, why didn't you lot record a pod from May 2019 to 2020? Very, very good question, Love Will Survive. And an appropriate name, because in that case, I sort of didn't. People will remember that I spent nearly a year working for Love Sport Radio as a radio host, and that was kind of the inception of this podcast. And then I was rather abruptly made redundant by a company that went bust about 8 months later, from which I took no pleasure because a lot of people lost their jobs and it was a good fun place to work. But yes, and that sort of took the wind out of our podcasting sails a bit. But then, well, the pandemic then sparked George and Calvin's arrival sparked us to return.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember Calvin reaching out to me on Twitter to say, I can't remember if he was just asking, do you want to do a podcast, or do you still do a podcast or something? And Calvin sort of encouraged me and James to find a solution, because I think the other thing was we were able to use that radio studio for free.
Yeah,
so we had like all the equipment and stuff. So it was quite a convenient marriage for us. But now, Calvin sparked us into life, and we met at the NTC, had a bit of a chat, and then I thought, God, he's he's quite interesting and got some opinions. He could work quite well, this Calvin guy, and here we are now.
2.5 years later. Yeah, and we've just gone past 200 podcasts as well, which is quite exciting.
When did we start doing it? Was it in COVID that we started doing it?
Yeah, September 2020. I had to go back.
Is that late? That was earlier.
Yeah. Strange, really, but yes. Well, Love Will Survive. I'm glad you noticed, and maybe you're someone who was a listener way back when. I'd be interested to know how many people can listen from the beginning. Probably not very many, because not very many people used to listen to that podcast. But there are lots more of you now, so that's exciting. And you can ask questions any way you want. Sammy Dowd on Twitter asks, was Calvin encouraged at all with Domi, I assume this means Dominic Thiem's, performance against Stefanos Tsitsipas, or does he still think there is no way he will come back? For people who missed Dominic Thiem's foray in the Madrid Open, he thrashed Carl Edmund 6-4, 6-1, and then went to a final set tiebreak against Stefanos Tsitsipas. I mean, Calvin, 2 French Open finalists, albeit obviously Thiem in the pre his injury. And take anything away from that?
What I think the issue is going to be is we're told that he had to change his forehand. Now, it's hard enough for anybody to come up with one truly world-class forehand, which Thiem did. It's basically impossible for anyone to come up with 2. And that's where I think the problem may lie, in that if he improves his forehand, say, 10% from what it is now, and everything else stays the same and he stays fit, I think you could probably be looking at a top 40 player. But I just find it difficult unless he can at some stage go back to his old forehand, but we're told he has to grip the racket different and everything. Unless he can do that, I find it difficult to get him back to the stage where he can be a Grand Slam champion and potential multiple Grand Slam champion, which I think is really sad, because I'd love to have seen peak Thiem go toe-to-toe with Alcaraz for a couple of years. Because that is the type of player that would cause Alcaraz problems, I think.
It'd be a really good matchup as well. I mean, I loved watching Thiem. You'll probably find it quite amusing, James, that I did watch some of this match. And I started watching it because I saw the first set score, and I was like, oh, is Thiem back?
Here we go.
And I proceeded, and I only watched the second set, and he was absolutely dreadful. It was so bad. Couldn't it? The forehand was appalling. So I kind of gave up because I was only really watching from a kind of Thiem fanboy perspective. So I missed all the good bits basically and saw rubbish Thiem rather than a good one. But the forehand was really, really poor in the bits I was watching, and I found it quite surprising he was then able to make it so competitive in the third set, because just watching the match, he just wasn't hurting him at all. Like every shot was kind of, it felt like he was rolling the forehand in. It just felt like a slow shot that was so easy for Tsitsipas to deal with, and he'd come into good positions, balls that Thiem would be putting away comfortably 3 years ago. You know, he had a really good forehand.
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh, Tsitsipas is always going to get to that. He can't hurt him. And that is a big problem for your forehand, particularly because that's the controlling shot of the game. And if you can't put away simple shots against, Tsitsipas, okay, he's not terrible at retrieving things, but you should be able to put enough pressure on his backhand with your forehand that you get easier balls and easy putaways. And Thiem just wasn't really doing that in the bits I watched. So I may have missed the best bits, obviously. Clearly have, looking at the set scores. But yeah, there still is a fundamental problem, I think.
I watched the Thiem Edmund match in the first round with interest, because it's quite funny. Well, not funny. It's a bit tragic, really, for Thiem and Edmund to be unseeded and clashing in the first round of the Madrid Open, when there was probably a point in each of their careers when we thought they would both be seeded and playing in the semi-finals and finals of these sorts of tournaments. And it was basically a good match until 4-all, and then Edmund chucked in a couple of double faults, and it all went a bit pear-shaped. But I thought Thiem played quite well, but actually, to be honest, I thought Carl Edmund, for the most part, just went away. The level went, and it wasn't great. And I think he only hit about 7 winners in the entire match and 24 odd unforced errors. So, my personal thought is that the level isn't far away from Thiem, but the question is going to be, kind of as Calvin has illustrated, how much he can improve with the limitations that he now has. And, we talk about it with Emma Raducanu. Risks are a real tough thing, and who knows how you're going to deal with it, George.
Yeah, I think the other kind of reflection I've had a little bit in this period, because we're sort of seeing something similar with Zverev in some ways. I don't think there's such a fundamental problem with Zverev's tennis in terms of a technique thing, but just this long period where you've had a long absence and you're coming back and trying to find your form and your rhythm. And I was just reflecting that Del Potro's return is like absolutely mental, isn't it? That he actually lost a shot completely and was still kind of able to kind of forge that top career. But had it been the other way around and it was the forehand he couldn't hit, I mean, Del Potro probably wouldn't be coming back as a top 100 player. So I think Thiem, given his limitations, is still doing quite well considering, to be top 100 in the world at anything is amazing. But to do, regardless. So, yeah, it's kind of a weird one because
he's basically coming back as Richard Gasquet. Like great backhand, crap forehand. Like great one-handed backhand, crap forehand. Or, what's his name? The other French guy, Paire.
Benoit Paire, yeah, but he's two-hander, of course. But yes, and probably has a slightly different attitude from Dominic. Yeah. I can't think of two more different approaches to the game, to life, than Dominic. I used to work for Gunther Thiem and Benoit Paire. But I hope that answers your question, Sandy, and thanks very much for asking it. Tim Mason on Twitter, Dr. Tim Mason. Protected rankings, how long do you get them for? And who has ever really benefited? Kyle Edmund not having much fun at the moment. I'm just going to rattle through the sort of practicalities here because I had a quick check of the ATP rules because I couldn't remember the exact numbers involved. Basically, your ranking for the first 3 months after you stop playing, i.e. after you get injured, gets averaged. So, essentially, as the points drop off, you get this kind of average ranking, which means that your protected ranking isn't, exactly what you were ranked, but it's somewhere in that region. And then if you're out for between 6 and 12 months, you get 9 protected entries. And if you're out for more than 12 months, you get 12 protected entries, which is where you get to enter a tournament as though you were ranked on that 3-month average ranking. So it means that you can get into tournaments despite the fact that you haven't played for more than a year. Yes, obviously not working out brilliantly for Kyle, who's obviously been out for a long time. George, I don't know if you're maybe best placed. Do you think it's ever really helped anyone?
Yeah, I do. I think it helped Del Potro and people like that. I do think it's like broadly a good idea. There are players it's not helped, and then it's just felt like, I kind of feel like you should have to at least win like one match over like the 6 tournaments you play, or it should like get doubled or something. Because there are players who just keep turning up for like a 2-year period, using it, or however long the period is, and keep just saving it for the Grand Slams because they know they're going to get the money, but they aren't coming close to kind of being at that level, and that feels a bit. I say, but then I suppose they would argue that it's not their fault they got injured and they have a right to kind of earn that sort of money from the work they had put in. So, yeah, but I broadly support it. I think it's a good thing on the whole.
I think it's not. We shouldn't just look at it through the prism of the top, former top 20 players or something like that, because those guys are always going to get wild cards anyway. Like Murray will get wild cards as much as he wants. Del Potro will. Thiem will. It's a great help for players who are outside of the top 100. That say you've worked, you've really grafted to get yourself up to 300 in the world, and then you have a serious injury and you're out for 12 months. You'd have to start right back down at the beginning of futures tournaments with no points at that stage. So that's what it's there for. That if you work your way back up and get yourself fit, and you can basically come back in at 300 or 350, 400, rather than having to go and start right at the beginning with no points, because it would take you, it would take you 2 years to get back up to that from nothing, or even a little bit higher, say 200. That's a long time, and as well, it's for a lot of these guys as well, it's money. Like you can't, like, even for the guys who are say ranked 70, also for someone like Kyle, it's his job, it's his career as well, and he's been injured. So I see a lot of people going, "Oh, why is he using his protected for the slams and the Masters?" People need money, and they're the ones that have the biggest paychecks, and they have the biggest points as well. So if you win, it's the quickest way to get your natural ranking back up.
Yeah. I think also, I was just thinking there about, those guys who've grafted their way up to 300. When you graft your way up to 300, you run at a loss. Like, you run at a massive loss. And you're doing that because you're speculating, for any number of reasons, but effectively it's a speculation that you will eventually make it into the profitable ranks of the rankings. And it therefore would seem unfair if you then had to go and spend all that money again, like grinding your way up from... Because, as we've pointed out before, talking about, guys you coach, Calvin, there are certain bits of the rankings where you plateau and you can win tournaments and it doesn't really fire you up the rankings very far. So I think I'm struggling to think of specific people it helps, and I think there's probably an element of confirmation bias that you see someone on PR and they lose first round really badly and it's like, well, what was the point in that? I think it probably is the kind of thing as well, if you took it away, you would realise how important it was, because you'd get some really horrible stories where someone gets a major injury, is out for 2 years, and then goes back, there's no point, I can't afford to try and spend a year fighting my way back up, so I'm just going to retire, which would be the worst thing, I think.
Yeah, no, I'd agree, and I think it's, has it helped anybody? What would help in qualifiers? Because for me, it would be that if you're around, say that you were 150 when you got injured and you were out for 18 months, if you got back up to 150 within you wouldn't use it for 12 tournaments in a row. There'd be other ones that you use you play without using it. If you're around about back up there somewhere like 200, I would say it's worked, because you wouldn't have got that high without the protected ranking.
Yeah, I think so. And yes, of course, people think about it tactically, and they're not, don't hide that. I remember talking to Kyle in Australia, and he was saying, well, I'm going to go and play a couple of, I think ITF events maybe in America to get some match time, and then I'm going to go and use my protected ranking to play this tournament, and then I'll go and play a few quote-unquote natural ranking tournaments, ones that he can get in on his natural ranking, and then, I just kind of pick and choose to help him work his way back. And yeah, I don't think that's hurting anyone. I've never looked at a draw sheet and gone, God, there are 9 protected rankings in this tournament. How incredibly unfair. It doesn't happen. We talk about getting in as doubles guys more, and the unfairness of that, being able to use your singles ranking to get into a doubles tournament and that kind of thing. I think that's a great injustice. Right, one last question. It's from Laurie again. Hopefully a fun one, he says. Was Brandon Murphy's behind-the-back passing shot in the UK Pro League the shot of the year so far? I can't quite tell from the footage, but he looks like he's fully de-weighted when he hits it. If you look in the show notes, I will have posted a link to this shot. I mean, it is pretty incredible. He's running into the forehand corner and effectively runs past the ball and then whacks it down the line. I mean, is that the shot of the year, Calvin? It's pretty impressive.
I mean, some of our listeners will know that I used to coach Brandon for a couple of years. And, he's a phenomenally talented kid. And he's got those shots and more in the locker. But it's an exhibition shot. It's not shot of the year, no, because it's not a relevant shot. I don't want to sound like a misery guts here, but it's not a relevant shot.
He did win the point.
How many games did he win after that?
I'm not sure.
He won no games after that.
Oh,
so
no.
it's like, we talk about football, we talk about the greatest goals ever have to be in relevant big matches, big game-changing type things. And I went pretty big on the podcast a couple of years ago when Dominic Thiem hit that backhand cross court, and I said it was the shot of the year. I think it was something like 7-all in the tiebreak, and he hit a cross court backhand winner while his opponent was actually stood where the winner went straight past him. That's a shot of the year. Now, I think at the stage when Brandon hit it, it was like a set and a one break down and 15-30. And, it was kind of it's an exhibition shot. He doesn't really have to hit it. He can just hit a forehand. Like, you know, you just slow down and hit a forehand there. But, yeah, it's great fun, but, you know, it's not shot of the year now.
I was just, I actually preferred Ben Shelton's shot anyway, but he also went
Shelton
on to lose.
Shot. Yeah.
So that doesn't help get into Calvin's shot of the year debate either. But that was an absolute cracker as well. So that was
two,
really
great. You know, we like to see them. You know, we like to see them. Those type of shots. You know, it's nice. It brings something different to the game. And it got a lot of exposure. You know, it's like a lot of. But anybody who knows Brandon knows that he can. You know, he's one of the few players who can play that type of shot. He's got phenomenal talent for the game of tennis. But guess the problem is he plays shots like that at one break down in a second set.
Yeah, quite.
I will say as well, there's nobody. I've never seen any. I don't think I've ever seen Brandon miss a through the leg shot. He's phenomenal at them, and he can hit lob winners off it as well. Every time the ball goes over the net, he wins the point basically. But again, the decision to make them—that's the issue.
Right, well, let's. That's all the questions we're going to do for today. There's a couple. I know I said we weren't going to do Madrid Open. There's a couple of things I just wanted to kind of flag, bring up, mention, whatever. Andy Murray is playing tomorrow in Aix-en-Provence in a challenger that he took a late wildcard for. Absolutely hysterical that he took a late wildcard for Aix-en-Provence to get some game time, and then draws the other high-profile late wildcard in terms of Gael Monfils, which, I mean, it's funny, but I feel for the tournament organiser, like, gets Gael Monfils and Andy Murray into his challenger during the Madrid Open, and then pulls them out of the hat next to each other in the first round. Isn't
Monfils basically retired, though, now?
Well, I don't think he wants to, but I mean, he's on the way out, but he's desperately trying to hang on, I think.
When did he last play a match?
What a great question. I mean, he had that horrible run, didn't he, where he literally, he was in tears in press conferences because he just couldn't win a match. And he even started working with Gunther for a while, which is pretty punchy. Wow. He last played in Ostrava. He beat Evan Furness by retirement, to be fair, and then lost to Damir Djuma in Ostrava in April. So he has played a bit, but he has lost 5 tour level matches in a row. He is now grinding challengers almost professionally, it would seem.
Could be like one of those wrestling retirement matches, couldn't it?
The winner stops. Yeah. Could well be.
Murray will be joining him in the challengers if he keeps playing like he did this week.
Yes, and he was fairly open about the fact that he didn't play well in Madrid. I mean, it was a kind of classic Murray where he played badly in Monte Carlo and said he might not play on the clay, full stop. And then he said, I'm going to play Madrid. And then he went to Madrid and lost and said afterwards, I'm going to have to play the French Open because I might never get the chance to play it again. And talking like he's about to retire on the spot. And then he goes and signs up for a challenger in the south of France. He is still down to play Rome as well as the French.
I mean, Vavasori was playing here today, and I watched maybe half an hour of his match, and he lost. And the number of different people who said a variation of the words, "How on earth did Murray lose to this guy?" were in double figures at least.
Murray had a good pop at one of your current colleagues, James, didn't he? It was Simon Briggs, wasn't it? He was asking him. It was.
It was because Murray played the worst shot I've ever seen by almost any professional tennis player when he was on top of the net and had an entire court to aim at and somehow put it into the net. And I think he said to Briggsy, even you'd have made that. I mean, I don't know how good you are at tennis, but I think you'd have made that.
Would he have made it, George? You know him at tennis, Briggsy?
He'd have got it in the court. Whether he'd have finished or not. No, Briggsy's fine. He's a very dedicated late
I was going to say, he works very hard at it. And makes
he's improved loads. Yeah, we used to hit a fair bit when I was.
He's got a rubbish backhand as well, hasn't he, George? Like, do you two, when you hit, do you just go forehand to forehand?
I wouldn't say my backhand's rubbish, Calvin. It's just,
take that
limited.
Right.
Oh dear.
Okay. It's not
I'm
quite.
told
it's not quite peak team against Wawrinka, is it not? Though? Like when you two are hitting.
I do rasp it a bit like Wawrinka occasionally. When I catch it, it does fly.
Okay. I'm told the best player in the British press pack is Eleanor Crooks, perhaps. She's pretty handy, I think.
Good player.
The real
Tamani's not bad as well.
Yeah, I heard good things. The real gun of the press box is a guy who works in Australia for The Guardian and a few other people. Is Courtney Walsh, not the cricketer. He is like a proper tennis player, I'm told.
There's two French or Swedish lads as well who are great, and they hit at the ATP finals with Mahou and what's his partner called?
Herbert.
After, and they were trading blows with those two pretty well. It was
really
quite impressive. Yeah, they're good.
That happens. I find. Do you guys find that happens a lot with the journalists? I find the Spanish and French, they tend to also be really good. Like, I played football with Julian Lorenz, and he's a phenomenal footballer.
They're definitely better than we are. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Yeah, the Continentals.
Madrid's one of the best tournaments to go to as a journalist from this perspective, though, that they have a journalist tournament there on the actual clay courts, out on like court 14 in the second week. So I've played there. I was a quarterfinalist one year, got lost to some Spaniard who was obviously very good. Home advantage.
You and Holger Rune both not enjoying home crowds, clearly.
Well, the court suits me quite well because it's quick clay and it bounces really high, which for me is quite useful because I am quite tall. So it was a good match. You know, he was the more natural clay court player, but my strengths worked quite well.
We've had a lot of
10-8.
I've had a lot of George being boring about his own life today. I apologise to listeners. Was there enough room behind the court for you to go very, very deep, George? Because if not, you've got something in common with Daniil Medvedev.
Yeah, there was plenty of room for me, but I don't play quite as deep as he does. So I'm far too lazy to want to retrieve from the baseline like that all game.
It was just something else I wanted to flag from Madrid. People will have seen today Daniil Medvedev get in a fight with Carlos Bernardes and then the tournament supervisor, because he said, I'm the number 2 seed. Why have I got this disadvantage of being out on the second court? He was not on the main court in Madrid. And on match point, he very nearly took out a line judge. He was that deep. She was like shrinking against the back wall. He was beaten by Aslan Karatsev in straight sets. I watched quite a lot of this match, and I don't want to say Australia 2021, but that's what it reminded me of. Like Karatsev doing that thing where he just gets ridiculously hot and starts whacking forehands.
Yeah, he was. I saw there was a stat that was like Medvedev's first like non-top 100 defeats at Masters level or something like that, or first one for a long time anyway. And I was kind of thinking, yeah, but this bloke is a troll. We've been here before.
Yeah.
That's such a meaningless statistic.
Yeah, he's just like he is a top 50 player, but underneath like 15 layers of a non-top 200 player, and it just depends which one you happen to break through to that particular day. As I say, we'll talk much more about Madrid, and we might even talk about Zhang Zhizhen, who is on a historic run. He's just beaten Taylor Fritz, having dumped out Cam Norrie as well. Both very close matches, it should be said. But I would like to just pay tribute to that. I think they call him Jerry, where he trains in Florida, because people
That's
who
a different guy. That's a different lad.
No, there's 2 Jerrys. There are 2. There's a big
right.
Jerry and a little Jerry. But basically, there are 3 Chinese lads who all train together in Florida, and people will know that generally when people come from China to live in the West, they choose like a white name, for want of a better word. At school, we had quite a lot of Chinese kids at school who similarly had all chosen names, but they were always just really sort of outdated ones. So yeah. I knew like a Dorian, a Jensen, a Jasper, like names. Admittedly, people at my school also had silly names who were just English and absurd, like Peregrine. But that's another story. George, you had something to say.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, one more boring story about my own life, James, if you'll humour me.
Honestly.
Years ago, when I was like 18, we went to the Bollettieri Academy to... I think I've said on the pod before, on the episode when he died, that I had a lesson with Nick when I was there. But
yeah,
I was going to tell you what my nickname was from that whole thing, and I'll do an impression. They they used to make us do running drills, and they'd go on 6'9", 6'9", get going.
For the record, you're not 6'9".
I'm not 6'9". And when I'd hit like an ace, they go, "Oh, he's serving out of a tree, 6'9", 6'9", serving out of a tree."
Right. Well, on that note,
that was the best of the boring stories, I think.
Okay,
Calvin enjoyed it.
I think if we have to choose between Rick Macci and George Belshaw, I think most people. Well, anyway, we won't put that to the listeners because George might get replaced. That's all we've got time for this week, as I say. Thank you very much to you, Calvin, to you, George, for joining me as always. Thank you to Rick Macci for his time. Fascinating to hear from him. Please do leave us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you share the podcast to people. Tell your friends about us. And most importantly, please do come back next week.
Sports Social Podcast Network.